The Nintendo Switch 2 has been out for some time. A new console means new games, and so in this video, I would like to discuss what it could mean for the Monster Hunter series. It had a decent presence on the original Nintendo Switch, and with the Next system being so much more capable, the possibilities have expanded. So today we'll talk about what we could expect to see from Monster Hunter on the Nintendo Switch 2. Monster Hunter Rise was a fairly prominent timed exclusive for the Switch, and to this day, it's actually the best-selling third-party game on that platform, even outselling Minecraft of all things. Rise on the Switch is also one of the more technically impressive games on that platform too, but compromises can be seen in a lot of places. The game runs at a fairly stable 30 frames per second, and its resolution is a fixed 540p in handheld and 756p in TV mode, which isn't great, as it results in a pretty rough looking image. It's actually much worse now, because the Switch 2's screen is so much bigger. Rise came to PC just under a year after the Switch release, and to other consoles another year after that, and this essentially unchained the game. You can see for yourself, it's smoother, cleaner, the PC version allows for up to 4K, with significantly higher frame rates. The textures are enhanced, and the loading times are massively reduced. When Rise came to Xbox and PlayStation, these upgrades were present there too. The Switch 2 can run Switch games better without developer input, so Rise for instance loads faster and doesn't drop frames in areas the original system often did, but it's still outputting that subpar resolution and is still not going to hit 60 frames per second, which would be ideal, wouldn't it? Like with the PS5 and Series X, games can be patched to fully take advantage of the system. Therefore, I reckon Rise's PC and console upgrades could come to the Switch too. The system is a fair bit weaker than the PS5 and even Xbox Series S, but it's about 10 times stronger than the original Switch. It could definitely run the game with a better resolution, 60 frames or higher, and much better loading times. The current Monster Hunter Stories duology could be enhanced too. Stories 2 Wings of Ruin had an uncapped frame rate on the original Switch, and as such was always really unstable, fluctuating between 60 and 40 or 30 or 20, and it was bad. But now, it's a huge strength, because it means the Switch 2 brute forces it to run at a smooth 60 frames per second. However, it's still pretty blurry, and now has quite a few audio issues. I'm not sure if they were there before. It has been some time. Wings of Ruin is a very pretty game, and this can especially be seen on the PC version, where the image is clean and smooth, so the Switch 2 version could definitely be patched to run much better. Monster Hunter World began development in 2014, 1 year after Monster Hunter 4 released. The Wii U was the current Nintendo console at the time, and Capcom understandably decided not to bother with it, instead targeting the PS4 and Xbox One. The game was well into development by the time the Nintendo Switch materialized, and even when it was out, Capcom did not bring the game over. It's been said, but the Switch is rather weak, and even if it was capable of running World, it would likely require an obscene amount of compromises to bring the game over. The Switch got Monster Hunter Rise in the end, so all was well, but seeing as the Switch 2 is far more capable, it almost certainly could run Monster Hunter World. The rule of thumb with the system is that if the Steam Deck can run a game, then the Switch 2 can almost certainly run it as well, similarly or better. And World does run on the deck. Granted, I personally have to lower the settings slightly and cap it to 30 frames per second, but a dedicated console port to the Switch 2 could have the game looking and perhaps running better. World is the best-selling Capcom game, and to this day, there's a ton of Nintendo-only people who never played it. It could be a good opportunity to release the game packed with Iceborne included. I do think the game would probably need some kind of actual offline mode though. As it stands, World is a game that really wants you to be connected to the internet. You can play offline if your connection goes out, but you lose access to event quests and the sieges. That means you can't fight Fatalis or Elatrion or so many others. Portable systems are often without internet, so that could be a problem that Capcom would need to address for a port like this. I quite enjoy IOI's Hitman trilogy on PC. It requires an active online connection to access a huge chunk of the content though, and it can be frustrating when the connection drops. I was quite disappointed to find that the Switch 2 version of that game is identical in that regard, and doesn't have an offline mode. World isn't as bad about it, but I don't think it would be so difficult to have most of the content available locally. This is the big one. In my opinion, Wilds is probably one of the only true next-gen games right now. It targeted the PS5 and equivalent systems and used their new features to the maximum. There's two big questions. Can the Switch 2 run it? And if so, would Capcom bother porting it? Specs wise, the Switch 2 is comparable to the PS4, but that doesn't really tell the whole story. It has more RAM, it has fast storage and decompression, its CPU isn't awful. On paper, it's similar to a PS4, but with features seen on the PS5. and it can run next-gen games, such as Wild Hearts and more. It's also worth mentioning that Wild Hearts cannot really run on the Steam Deck. The deck runs PC games, while the Switch 2 is running dedicated custom ports made for the system. Monster Hunter Wilds is an intensive game that does not run great on PC and sort of maybe kind of runs on the Steam Deck if you absolutely slaughter the visuals and frame rates. But again, the Steam Deck is running the PC version, while the Switch 2 would theoretically get a custom port. And for what it's worth, the game is optimized on consoles, they just didn't bother with the PC version. The Xbox Series S is marginally stronger than the Switch 2, but it does run Wilds. The Series S is an interesting console because I find that most developers don't really optimize for it. They'll just dump the game there, and if it functions, they'll move on. Wilds on the Series S likely didn't have much effort put into it, but the game still runs. To me, that would indicate that a proper Switch 2 port is very much possible. It would probably have to run the game at a lower resolution at 30 frames per second, maybe with DLSS, similar to how Cyberpunk runs. It certainly wouldn't be easy either. It would need a lot of time, not just to get the game running, but to release it with the current updates at the time, then sync it up with other versions of the game. Some of you might remember, but World and Iceborne released later on PC, and the updates all came months later than console too. It was only late into Iceborne when they finally managed to sync it all up. Even Sunbreak on consoles received title updates 4 to 5 way after Switch and PC did. The same could happen for Wilds on Switch too, unless Capcom manages to sync it up. Currently, they're developing these updates for 3 different platforms. Adding another could complicate things and require a change to their workflow. And again, Wilds on Switch 2 would also benefit with some kind of true offline mode, which would not mesh well with the game's live service elements. I think it's safe to say we're getting a third Stories game. The sequel did really well, and they took the time to remaster the first game on modern platforms with full English voice acting and all the region exclusive content localized. So I think Stories 3 will happen sooner rather than later. Wings of Ruin is now 4 years old, and it sold quite well. If they started development in 2021, then we should see the next game either this or next year, and there's zero doubt it will come to Switch too. But to be honest, it will likely be multi-platform, and maybe even cross-gen. I just feel like it's worth highlighting. It will definitely be exciting though, since we're likely to get Rise, Sunbreak, and maybe even some Wilds monsters as rideable monsties. Wilds is the current Monster Hunter game, but it's very likely that Yasunori Ichinose, director of games like Freedom, Generations and Rise, is working on his next entry, and likely has been since 2021 or 2022. We will probably see that game before the end of 2028, and I believe it will target the Switch 2 specifications, just like how Wilds targets the PlayStation 5 and Rise targeted the Switch. That's a really exciting prospect, because while Rise was obviously held back by the Switch in many ways, it was still really ambitious, and the new system doesn't have many of the immediate drawbacks. Rise still managed to have 3 monsters on a locale at once, and the locales were decently sized with no segments, free wall climbing, and a greater degree of exploration than prior games, or even arguably Wilds. The loading times were reasonable, and the game had similar combat and features seen in Monster Hunter World. For all intents and purposes, it's a very impressive game. Ichinose and his team really achieved something special here. With Rise, a lot of development decisions were influenced by Monster Hunter World's success, which happened midway through development, and so in some ways the team had to dramatically increase Rise's scope to have open locales, modern graphics and other features. For their next game, they likely will not be blindsided like that again. They'll also quite literally be unchained in what they can achieve. Again, the Switch 2 is a highly advanced PlayStation 4, with few of that system's drawbacks. We could see something really amazing here, especially if they double down on the fully explorable maps. It will be some time before we end up seeing that game, but I'm really looking forward to whatever it will materialise as. This is way too early to be talking about this, but I wonder if Monster Hunter 7, or the next Yuya Takuda game to come after Wilds, will come to the Switch too. I would expect such a game to arrive beyond 2030, which feels ridiculously far into the future, even though it's only 5 years. For comparison, Elatrion's arrival to Iceborne was 5 years ago right now. Gaming hardware is sort of reaching its peak in terms of power capabilities, and the way the economy and consumer spending is going, it's hard to say whether or not the PlayStation 6 will even take off to a significant degree. I, for one, do not believe there will be any exclusive games for it. It doesn't make financial sense at all. I talked about how there were no opportunities for World to come to a Nintendo system because there was nothing viable that could run it at the time. It started development while the Wii U was a thing, and came out after the Switch, which was likely too weak to run it anyway. The same thing probably happened with Wilds. They initially decided they were going with next-gen systems and likely concluded that bringing it to the Switch would be a bad idea, which was, it was the right call, wasn't it? But if gaming hardware plateaus to the point the PS5 will still be a viable console in the next 5 or so years, it and the Switch 2 will still be supported for a very long time. A console generation is supposed to last around 7 years, but I do not know a single person who is dying for a new PlayStation in 2027. Sakuda will probably move on from Wilds next year. There's a decent chance that the next game starts development for current rather than future hardware. The last time this happened was Monster Hunter DOS, back when game development times were so much shorter. But if the PS5 generation lasts forever, it's certainly a possibility, and if that happens, it could come to the Switch too. But that is so far into the future that it's really hard to speculate. I really do not care about Outlanders, but I can see them bringing it to the Switch too, and also PC. A lot of mobile games do that. I made a video about the prospect of the classic Monster Hunter games returning. Pretty much everything I said there applies here. The games could come to the Switch too, but they'd likely also run on the current Switch. I recommend watching that video. It goes into a lot of the nitty gritty that I think a lot of people probably haven't considered. So that's what I reckon we could expect to see for Monster Hunter on the Switch too. Out of all of these, the future Ichinose game is the one that has a 100% likelihood. We just won't see it for some time. But I would very much welcome a Rise upgrade, a Wild port, and especially a Wilds port. I really like that game, and I need to see it on a handheld. Stories 2 was a lot more ambitious than the first game, and I think a third game could be really special too. It's also worth remembering that Capcom is committed to multi-platform releases. Stories 3 and the next Ichinose game will probably bare minimum come to PC day 1, and likely consoles as well. But I expect the Switch 2 to have a sizable impact regardless. This video is not really what I usually make, but I'm going to be very real with you. If you look at my last several videos, the last, 4 or 5, the runtime amounts to several hours. These videos have been really long, they've taken a lot of time to make, and I just wanted to make something shorter. And I think, it's fun to speculate about a new system. I know people are mixed on the Switch 2 due to its pricing, but I am quite enjoying mine, I used my Nintendo Switch a lot since 2018, as I bought it for Generations Ultimate, and this new system is a massive upgrade in every way. The only major issue is that a lot of games that were compromised for the Switch do not run as well as they could on the Switch 2. And so I really do hope more patches start rolling in. So how many of you have a Switch 2? And what do you hope Monster Hunter can bring to this thing? Thank you for watching this video. Remember to like and subscribe, and have a good day.